The glass shattered before Alara Moon could scream. One moment she was reaching for a silk scarf in the boutique window of Aurelia Galleria, and the next her body slammed into the display case with enough force to crack the tempered glass behind her. Pain exploded across her shoulder blade. The world tilted sideways as shoppers gasped and scrambled backward, their designer bags clutched to their chests like shields. "You think you can just walk away from me?" Nathan Crowell's voice was a razor cutting through the shocked silence. His hand was still fisted in her coat, yanking her upright even as her knees threatened to buckle. "You think you can parade around in your fancy clothes and pretend I don't exist?" Buralara's vision swam. Blood trickled warm down her temple where her head had connected with the display. She could taste copper on her tongue, but even through the haze of pain, she recognized that voice, the voice that once whispered promises, the voice that later hissed accusations, the voice she thought she'd finally escaped. "Let go of me," she said, and her voice didn't shake. "Not this time. Not anymore." Nathan laughed, harsh and bitter. His fingers dug deeper into her arm, leaving marks she knew would purple by morning. "Let go? You destroyed my life, Alara. You ruined everything we built together, and then you ran off to marry some criminal with money. Do you know what people say about you? Do you know what they call you?" Around them, phones emerged from pockets like weapons. Camera lenses focused. Recording lights blinked red. A teenager in the corner was already live streaming, her whispered commentary breathless with excitement at witnessing real drama unfold in Seoul's most exclusive shopping complex. "They call you a gold digger," Nathan continued, his face inches from hers now. She could smell the alcohol on his breath, see the bloodshot veins mapping the whites of his eyes. "A social climber who'll open her legs for anyone with a black card. Was I not good enough for you? Was everything I gave you not enough?" Alara felt something crack inside her chest, but it wasn't fear. It was the last brittle shell of the woman who used to flinch at his tone, who used to apologize for things that weren't her fault, who used to believe his version of their story. "You gave me nothing," she said quietly, and the words landed like stones in still water. "You took everything and called it love." Nathan's hand drew back. For a terrible second, she knew he was going to hit her. She saw it in his eyes, in the way his jaw clenched, in the tremor of barely controlled rage that made his whole body vibrate. He never got the chance. Two men in dark suits materialized from the crowd like shadows gaining form. The larger one caught Nathan's wrist mid-swing with crushing precision, while the smaller one positioned himself between Nathan and Alara, his stance protective and utterly unyielding. Nathan struggled, cursing and spitting threats, but he might as well have been fighting steel itself. "Ms. Moon, are you injured?" The smaller guard's voice was professional, calm, as if violent confrontations were simply part of the daily routine. "I'm fine, Marcus." Alara touched the cut on her temple, her fingers coming away red. "Just get him away from me." "Police are 2 minutes out," Marcus confirmed, his eyes never leaving Nathan's face. "And I've called Mr. Park." Something in Nathan's expression shifted at that name. The rage cracked just slightly, letting fear peek through underneath. "Park? Jin Park? You actually married that monster?" Alara straightened her spine despite the pain screaming through her shoulder. Blood dripped onto the marble floor in perfect crimson drops. "That monster treats me like I'm made of starlight. That monster holds me when I can't sleep. That monster would burn the world down before he'd let anyone hurt me." She stepped closer, close enough that Nathan had to look her in the eyes. "You're nothing to me now, not a memory, not a scar." Nathan's face twisted with something ugly. "You wouldn't even have a life without me. I made you, Alara. Everything you are I created. That business you're so proud of, I gave you the idea. Those connections you cherish, they were my friends first. Even the clothes on your back are because of me." "The clothes on my back are Valentino," Alara said coldly. "Paid for with money I earned from a company I built from ashes after you left me homeless and broke. The connections I cherish are people who saw me drowning and threw me a rope while you stood on the dock and pushed my head underwater. And the life I have now?" She smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut. "That's mine, every single piece of it. You get no credit for my survival." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. The crowd had swelled now, forming a loose circle around the scene, Alara recognized faces from magazines, from boardrooms, from charity galas. Souls elite, all bearing witness to Nathan Crowell's public meltdown in the middle of the city's most expensive shopping district. Bar Nathan seemed to realize his audience at the same moment. His eyes darted around wildly, seeing all those phones, all those cameras, all those recording devices capturing every word, every gesture, every second of his unraveling. "This isn't over," he hissed, still struggling against the iron grip of Alara's security. "You think you can humiliate me like this? You think there won't be consequences? I'll destroy you, Alara. I'll make sure everyone knows what you really are. I'll expose every dirty secret, every lie, every manipulation. Bar Mr. Crowell." Marcus's voice cut through the tirade like a blade. "I strongly suggest you stop talking. Anything you say is being recorded and can be used as evidence in the assault and harassment charges Ms. Moon will be filing." Nathan went pale. "Assault? I barely touched her." "You threw her into a glass display case," Marcus said flatly, "in front of approximately 70 witnesses. Ms. Moon is bleeding, the property is damaged, and you just threatened her life on camera." He tilted his head slightly. "Would you like to add anything else to that list, sir?" For the fight seemed to drain out of Nathan all at once. He sagged in the security guard's grip, suddenly looking smaller, older, pathetic in his wrinkled suit and scuffed shoes. The police burst through the Galleria entrance at that moment, their boots echoing against marble as they pushed through the crowd. Alara watched them approach with a strange sense of detachment, as if she were floating somewhere above her body, observing the scene from a safe distance. She watched them handcuff Nathan, watched him flinch and protest and demand his lawyer, watched him try one last time to catch her eye, to find some trace of the woman who used to love him, used to defend him, used to believe every word that came out of his mouth. Bar that woman was gone. Alara had buried her years ago in an unmarked grave, far from the wreckage Nathan had made of both their lives. Bar Ms. Moon. A police officer approached with cautious respect, the kind reserved for people married to men like Jin Park. "We'll need your statement, and you should see a medic." "A bar, of course." Alara touched her temple again, feeling the sticky warmth of blood matting in her hair. The pain was starting to throb now, insistent and sharp. "I'll cooperate fully with the investigation." "The ambulance is here," Marcus said quietly at her elbow. "Mr. Park as well." Alara's heart did something complicated in her chest. Even now, even after 2 years of marriage, the mention of Jin's name made her feel safe and terrified in equal measure. Safe because she knew he would move mountains to protect her. Terrified because she knew exactly how far he was willing to go. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as Jin Park walked through the Galleria entrance. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from owning half the city and having enough power to crush the other half without breaking a sweat. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, making him look like he'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. But it was his face that made people step back. That made the whispers die in throats, and the cameras lower slightly in unconscious submission. Jin Park's face was absolutely calm. His dark eyes scanned the scene with surgical precision, taking in every detail in seconds. The broken glass, the blood on the floor, the police hauling Nathan toward the exit, and finally, inevitably, Alara herself, standing with her head held high despite the crimson streaking down the side of her face. He was in front of her in 4 long strides. His hands came up to frame her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything in his expression. Alara, just her name, nothing else. But she heard everything underneath it. The fear, the rage, the relief, the promise of retribution. "I'm okay," she said, and meant it. "It looks worse than it is." Jin's thumb brushed carefully below the cut, his jaw tightening when she winced. "Marcus, report." Nathan Crowell accosted Ms. Moon in the boutique corridor, Marcus said crisply. He grabbed her, threw her into the display case, and made multiple verbal threats in front of witnesses. He was preparing to strike her when we intervened. "Police have arrested him for assault and public disturbance. Ms. Moon handled herself beautifully, sir." "Did she?" Jin's eyes never left Alara's face. "You're going to the hospital. Jin, not negotiable." His voice was soft, but there was steel underneath. You're bleeding. You could have a concussion. You're going to the hospital and letting actual doctors determine if you're okay." His hand slid down to her shoulders, steadying her when she swayed slightly. "Can you walk?" "Yes. I walked here, didn't I?" But even as she said it, the adrenaline was starting to fade, and with it went the illusion of steadiness. Her knees buckled. Jin caught her before she could fall, sweeping her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. Alara wanted to protest, but found herself leaning into his chest instead, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with something uniquely him. "I've got you," Jin murmured against her hair. "I've always got you." The crowd watched in absolute silence as Jin Park carried his wife through the Galleria, his security team forming a protective shield around them. Camera phones followed their progress, but nobody dared get too close. There were lines you didn't cross in Seoul's underground empire, and Jin Park drew those lines in blood when necessary. In the ambulance, Jin sat beside Alara while a paramedic cleaned the wound on her temple and checked her vitals. His hand never left hers, his thumb drawing small circles on her wrist as if reminding himself she was real, she was here, she was safe. "It's not deep," the paramedic announced. "No stitches needed. But we should still take you in for x-rays and a CT scan, just to rule out concussion. See?" Alara tried to smile. "I told you it looked worse than it was." Jin didn't smile back. "He put his hands on you. I know. He threw you into glass. I know. He was going to hit you." Jin's voice was still soft, still controlled, but Alara could feel the violence coiled underneath like a spring wound too tight. "In front of all those people he was going to hit you." Alara squeezed his hand. "But he didn't. Your security stopped him." "I'm okay, Jin." "You're bleeding." Jin touched the bandage on her temple with infinite care. "That's not okay. That's not even close to okay." At the hospital, they were immediately ushered into a private suite that probably cost more per hour than most people's monthly rent. Doctors came and went with efficient professionalism, taking scans and asking questions and making notes on tablets. Through it all, Jin stayed exactly where he was, a silent sentinel in the corner, watching everything with eyes that missed nothing. When they were finally alone, Alara sat on the edge of the examination table and looked at her husband, really looked at him, at the tension in his shoulders, at the way his hands were clenched into fists at his sides, at the muscle ticking in his jaw that meant he was fighting something huge and dangerous inside himself. "What are you thinking?" she asked quietly. Jin was silent for a long moment. "Then, I'm thinking about 27 different ways to make Nathan Crowell disappear. I'm thinking about which one would hurt the most. I'm thinking about calling in favors from people who owe me blood debts and letting them have their turn. I'm thinking—" He stopped, drawing in a ragged breath. "I'm thinking I want to break every bone in his body for touching you." Alara felt something hot and complicated unfurl in her chest. Not fear, never fear, not of Jin. "But you won't I?" Jin finally looked at her, and the raw fury in his eyes made her breath catch. "Give me one good reason why I shouldn't." "Because I don't want you to." Alara slid off the table and crossed to him, placing her hands on his chest, feeling his heart pounding beneath her palms. "Because I need you here, not in prison or dealing with the fallout of murder. Because what I need from you isn't violence, it's this, you. Standing with me, believing me, being my safety when the world gets scary." Jin's arms came around her, pulling her close, holding her as if she might vanish if he loosened his grip even slightly. "He hurt you." "He did," Alara agreed, pressing her face into his shoulder. "But I'm not broken, Jin. I survived him before. I'll survive this too. You shouldn't have to survive anything." Jin's voice was muffled against her hair. "You should be able to walk through the world without someone from your past trying to destroy you. Welcome to being human," Alara said with a weak laugh. "We all carry ghosts." Jin pulled back just enough to look at her face, his hands coming up to cup her cheeks with devastating gentleness. "Tell me what happened. Before today. Tell me what he did to you." Alara had been dreading this conversation for 2 years, had been avoiding it, deflecting it, changing the subject whenever Jin's questions got too close to the truth. But sitting here, in this sterile hospital room with the man who loved her more than life itself. She found she was tired of carrying the weight alone. "He destroyed me," she said simply, "financially, emotionally, systematically. Over the course of 3 years, Nathan Crowell took everything I had and convinced me it was my fault." Jin said nothing, just listened with absolute focus as Alara's story spilled out in broken fragments. She told him about the beginning, when Nathan was charming and attentive and made her feel like the center of his universe, about how he slowly isolated her from friends, from family, from anyone who might question his behavior, about how he took control of her finances, claiming it was for their future, for their shared goals, for the life they were building together. She told him about the business they started, the art gallery that was supposed to be their dream, but became her nightmare when Nathan's gambling addiction spiraled out of control, about how he drained their accounts, maxed out credit cards in her name, borrowed money from dangerous people and promised them she would pay it back. She told him about the night Nathan disappeared, leaving her with 6 figures of debt, an eviction notice, and a handwritten note that blamed her for his failure. About how she'd spent the next year working 3 jobs, sleeping on friends' couches, eating once a day because that was all she could afford. About how Nathan's influential family had blacklisted her from every art gallery in Seoul, making sure she could never work in her field again. "I was sleeping in my car when someone threw a brick through the window," Alara said, her voice finally breaking. There was a note attached. It said, "Nathan Crowell sends his regards. Pay up or pay in blood." I had to choose between buying food and replacing the window. I chose food. I spent 2 weeks sleeping in that car with broken glass on the back seat, trying to save enough money for repairs. Jin's hands were shaking against her face. "How long ago?" 4 years. I met you 6 months after that, at the charity auction where I was working security." Alara smiled through her tears. "You asked me why someone with my eyes was standing in the shadows instead of owning the room. Do you remember?" "I remember everything about that night," Jin said hoarsely. "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. I remember you told me beauty didn't pay bills. I remember offering you a job and you laughed in my face, because I thought you were trying to buy me," Alara said. "Everyone in Seoul knows what kind of man Jin Park is, what kind of business you run. I thought you were like Nathan, rich, powerful, cruel. What changed your mind?" Alara touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "You came back. Every event I worked, there you were, asking me questions, listening to my answers, treating me like I was human instead of just another pretty face in the crowd. You offered me a job 5 more times before I finally said yes, and you never once made me feel like I owed you anything for it." Jin closed his eyes, pressing his forehead to hers. "I fell in love with you the night we met. Everything after that was just me trying to convince you I was worth the risk." "You are," Alara whispered. "You're worth everything." They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet sanctuary of the hospital suite, finding strength in proximity and shared breath, and the simple fact of survival. Finally, Jin pulled back. His face had shifted, hardened into something familiar and terrible. "Nathan Crowell will pay for what he did to you." "Jin, not murder," Jin said, reading her fear. "I promised you I'd never make you watch me cross that line. But there are other ways to destroy a man, cleaner ways. Ways that don't leave blood on your hands or nightmares in your sleep." He kissed her forehead, right above the bandage. "Trust me?" Alara searched his eyes and found nothing but cold determination and burning love in equal measure. "Always. Then let me protect you the only way I know how," Jin said. "Let me make sure Nathan Crowell regrets the day he learned your name." Within 4 hours of leaving the hospital, Nathan Crowell's life began to unravel with mathematical precision. Financial records mysteriously appeared on investigative journalists' desks, detailing 3 years of fraud, embezzlement, and debt accrued through illegal gambling operations. Business partners received anonymous tips about Nathan's creative bookkeeping and his habit of using company funds for personal expenses. Banks suddenly decided to audit his accounts, freezing his assets pending investigation. The media picked up the story like starving wolves scenting blood. Nathan Crowell, once the golden boy of Seoul's art scene, was revealed as nothing more than a con artist with a trust fund and delusions of grandeur. The engagement to Alara Moon, framed as a tragic love story in Nathan's version of events, was exposed as financial exploitation and emotional abuse documented in saved messages, recorded calls, and testimony from witnesses who'd been waiting years for someone to finally ask. Alara watched it unfold from the safety of the penthouse she shared with Jin, high above the city lights. News articles scrolled across her tablet screen, each one more damning than the last. Nathan's father, a prominent lawyer with political aspirations, held a press conference where he looked older than his years and apologized for his son's actions. Nathan's friends, the same ones who'd helped blacklist Alara from the industry, suddenly had no comment when reporters called. "You did this," Alara said, not quite a question. Jin was standing at the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at Seoul spread below them like a glittering circuit board. "I made some calls, shared some information that was already public record, just buried under layers of legal protection and family money. The rest," he turned to look at her, "the rest is just truth finally seeing daylight. His father called me," Alara admitted. "Left a voicemail. He wants to meet." Jin's expression went carefully neutral. "Do you want to meet him?" "I don't know." Alara set down the tablet and joined Jin at the window, slipping under his arm and letting him pull her close. "Part of me wants to tell him exactly what his son did. Part of me wants to watch him squirm and apologize and offer me money like that will somehow make it better. But another part," she sighed, "another part of me just wants to move on, to stop letting Nathan Crowell take up space in my head." "Then we move on," Jin said simply. "But first, we make sure he can never hurt you or anyone else again." The meeting with Nathan's father, Richard Crowell, took place in a private room at one of Jin's hotels. Alara wore Chanel and her favorite heels, armor disguised as fashion. Jin sat beside her, his presence a silent promise that she wasn't alone, would never be alone again. Richard Crowell looked like his world had ended. His expensive suit couldn't hide the weight loss, the shadows under his eyes, the tremor in his hands as he set down his briefcase. "Ms. Moon, Mr. Park, thank you for agreeing to see me. You have 30 minutes, Jin said coolly. Use them wisely." Richard flinched but nodded. "I want to apologize, not just for Nathan's behavior at the Galleria, but for everything. My wife and I raised him to be better than this. We thought we were preparing him for success, but we were just teaching him that consequences were for other people." He looked directly at Alara. "What he did to you is unforgivable. The debt, the isolation, the abuse, I had no idea. If I had known..." "You would have what?" Alara asked quietly. "Stopped him? Or covered it up to protect your reputation?" Richard's silence was answer enough. "I don't want your apology," Alara continued, "and I don't want your money. What I want is accountability. I want Nathan to face real consequences. I want him to get help for his gambling addiction and his violent behavior. I want him to make restitution to the other people he's hurt, because I know I'm not the only one. There are 3 other women," Richard admitted, his voice cracking. "They've come forward in the last 48 hours. Similar stories, similar patterns." He pulled documents from his briefcase with shaking hands. "My lawyers have prepared a comprehensive restitution plan. Nathan will be required to attend intensive therapy for a minimum of 2 years. He'll be banned from the art industry permanently. His trust fund has been liquidated to pay back debts and provide compensation to his victims. And if he violates the terms of this agreement..." Richard looked at Jin. "I understand Mr. Park has resources to ensure Nathan faces appropriate consequences." Jin's smile was sharp enough to cut. "I do indeed." Alara read through the documents with growing disbelief. It was thorough, specific, and legally binding. More than she'd ever expected. "Why are you doing this?" Richard met her eyes, and she saw genuine shame there. "Because my son is a monster and I helped create him. Because you deserved better. Because 3 other women deserved better. And because... His voice dropped to almost a whisper. Because if I don't do this, if I don't hold Nathan accountable now, the next woman might not survive him. The words hung in the air like a death knell. Alara thought about the brick through her car window, about Nathan's hands shoving her into glass, about the rage in his eyes that promised violence without limit. I'll sign, she said. On one condition. Anything. Alara leaned forward. You establish a foundation. In your name, with your money. Dedicated to helping women escape financial abuse. You fund it. You promote it. You use your platform and your connections to make sure other women don't end up sleeping in cars with broken windows because someone they loved destroyed their life and called it romance. Richard stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, something like respect flickering across his face. Consider it done. 2 weeks later, the Phoenix Path Initiative held its official launch at a downtown venue that had once housed the gallery Alara and Nathan built together. Jin had bought the building years ago and offered it to Alara for whatever she wanted. She chose this. The space was transformed, full of light and art and women who'd survived what Alara survived. The press was there, cameras flashing, questions flying. But Alara stood at the podium with her head high and her voice steady as she told her story to the world. She talked about survival, about rebuilding, about the difference between the man who broke her and the man who helped her remember how to be whole. She talked about the Phoenix Path and its mission, providing financial literacy education, legal assistance, and emergency housing for women escaping abusive relationships. We rise from ashes, Alara said, looking directly into the cameras. We take what tried to destroy us and we build something beautiful from the rubble. We survive, we thrive, we become phoenixes. The applause was deafening. Backstage afterward, Jin found her. He didn't say anything, just pulled her into his arms and held her while the adrenaline drained away and left her shaking. You were magnificent, he murmured against her hair. I was terrified, Alara admitted. You were both. Jin pulled back to look at her face. That's what makes it brave. That night, Alara's phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. She almost deleted it without reading, but something made her open it instead. The message was from Nathan. Just 2 sentences. I'm sorry for what I did to you. I'm getting help. Alara stared at the words for a long time, feeling nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no relief, just a profound sense of distance, as if Nathan Crowell belonged to another lifetime, another version of herself she could barely remember. She deleted the message without responding and set down her phone. Jin was watching her from across the room, questions in his eyes. Everything okay? Everything's perfect, Alara said, and meant it with her whole heart. 6 months later, the Phoenix Path Initiative had helped 43 women escape dangerous relationships and rebuild their lives. The foundation Richard Crowell established had provided over $2 million in support services. Nathan Crowell was in his 7th month of court-mandated therapy and working a minimum wage job to pay restitution, his trust fund long since depleted and his reputation thoroughly destroyed. And Alara Moonpark stood on the balcony of her penthouse, watching sunrise paint Seoul in gold and pink, feeling Jin's arms wrap around her from behind. What are you thinking about? Jin asked, his chin resting on her shoulder. Alara leaned back into him, into his strength and his warmth and his unwavering presence in her life. I'm thinking about phoenixes, how they burn before they can rise, how the fire is necessary, how you can't become something new without destroying what you were. Heavy thoughts for sunrise, Jin murmured. Maybe. Alara turned in his arms, looking up at his face, at the man who'd seen her at her worst and chose to love her anyway. Or maybe I'm just realizing that Nathan Crowell didn't destroy me. He tried. God, he tried so hard. But I survived him, Jin. I survived and I became something he could never touch or taint or claim as his creation. Jin's hands came up to frame her face with familiar gentleness. You survived him. I did, Alara agreed, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones like marrow. And the world is better because I did. Jin kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promises kept and promises still to come. Around them, Soul woke up to another day, another chance, another breath of life in a city that never stopped moving. And Alara Moonpark, who'd once slept in a car with broken glass on the back seat, who'd once believed she deserved the cruelty served to her like love, who'd once thought surviving was the best she could hope for. Alara smiled against her husband's lips and felt like flying. She survived Nathan Crowell. Her husband ended him, and she rose from the ashes more beautiful and more powerful than anyone who tried to burn her could ever imagine. The Phoenix had finally come home. If you enjoyed this story of survival, strength, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel for more powerful narratives. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. What moment resonated most with you? And don't forget to like this video to help others find this story. Together, we rise from our ashes. Together, we become phoenixes. Thank you for watching.